substantial infrastructure congestion beneath the streets of Chicago and changes in construction schedules due to other utilities and emerging public project works. Over the life of the program, we estimate SMP charges will add about 2% to the annual customer bill. We think that's a reasonable amount to invest in the long-term safety and reliability of Chicago's natural gas delivery system. We understand that some customers struggle to make ends meet. That's why we have dramatically expanded our Share the Warmth program, committed to continuing to provide high levels of assistance to our customers. The tragedy outside Boston and its aftermath have made clear how critical it is for companies like ours to thoroughly plan and safely execute our SMP work in all aspects: the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of the system. All of these aspects are closely regulated by the Illinois Commerce Commission. Their job, as well as the federal agencies responsible for pipeline safety, the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, or PHMSA, is working closely together with us to protect people and the environment. The notion that the program receives little scrutiny is a misunderstanding of the underlying legislation and the regulatory process. The Illinois Commerce Commission recently completed an extensive, open, and transparent 2-year project review that included input from a broad spectrum of interested parties. The program is also subject to legislative caps on customer rate impacts, annual cost and prudency reviews by the ICC, monthly and quarterly metrics reporting, outside auditor reviews, and an outside engineering study. In fact, right now, Peoples Gas and the ICC are working with an outside engineering firm to evaluate the condition of our distribution system. I would like to close with one very important point. The benefits of SMP extend well beyond the safety and reliability of our natural gas delivery system. It has also become a significant economic engine in Chicago. SMP generates about 2,000 jobs during the construction season and has been a key driver for our supplier diversity program, which grew from $68 million in 2015 to $125 million last year. SMP also allowed us to create a new partnership with the Gas Workers Local 18007 and City Colleges of Chicago's Dawson's Technical Institutes to train veterans for careers with Peoples Gas. So far, we've hired more than 400 vets alone through the program. We've also partnered with Chicago Public Schools on a vocational training program at our training facility in Little Village to prepare students for gas utility careers. In summary, this critical safety upgrade project is needed to lessen the risk of incidents like those outside Boston from happening in Chicago. Despite the challenges of working in a dense urban area, the costs associated with the program are reasonable. Robust safeguards are in place to protect customers from imprudent or unnecessary costs. We will continue to look for efficiencies in the program to hold costs down, but one thing we will never compromise is the safety of our customers or the public at large. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Andy. I'd like to begin by having committee members chime in if they would like to do so at this time. Alderman Rewards.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to say thank you for coming out and speaking on behalf of Peoples Gas. The fact is, do you see any, because of what we're doing here today, do you see any disruption of services or workmanship or folks, even just the companies that are working to make this happen, which I'm very grateful, by the way, will there be any disruption because of what we're doing here today? Because my concern is that we want to keep people working, and you're doing just that.
As we sit here today, we're making great progress this year, just like we have in the past. We've upgraded almost 1,000 miles of new pipe in the ground. I would hope that we don't slow down the progress. If you look at the past regulatory proceeding, which just ended at the end of, beginning of 2018, at the end of that 2-year review, as part of that process, they already slowed down the pace of the program to be done by 2030. They extended it out by 50% to be done by 2040. There's a safety deferral that you're accepting when you do that extension. I would hope that this doesn't ultimately lead to a decision to further delay those safety benefits in neighborhoods we have not yet been to. So I hope that would not be where we ultimately go, and hope that we continue to make progress.
Well, we want to keep people working too, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Alderman Villegas and Alderman Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You talked about this program. How much of money are you spending with minority and women-owned businesses on this program?
We spent, I'll give you the company total and then the portion of that is S&P. We spent about $125 million in 2018 on diverse firms. Of that, about 70 to 75% is part of the S&P program, so the vast majority is directly connected to S&P. And then of that, about 80% of those entities that provide those services are in and around the Chicago area.
Right. And then I heard you mentioned that you are cooperating and making sure that veterans are working on this project as well.
Yes, we have, we've employed 400 veterans to date, and in fact, the total program just had their 500th graduation, graduate this spring.
Well, I think that, you know, sometimes, you know, there's a cost of doing business in the city of Chicago. There's a cost in making sure that gas is reliable, being delivered in a safe way. And that goes the same thing with the water as well. We're talking about infrastructure that hasn't been touched in some cases over 80 years. And deferred maintenance always catches up with you. So at some point, someone has to pay. And I know that you went down to Springfield, got this legislation introduced and passed overwhelmingly. You've been reporting to the ICC. I think they brought us some issues. You've addressed these issues. And so I just want to continue seeing how people's gas is performing. I appreciate the chairman for calling these hearings. I also want to hear from some of the other groups as well. But I think that the fact that you're employing veterans, the fact that you're spending tons of money with minority and women-owned businesses, making sure they're participating on this program is something that I can support. So I'll wait to hear from some of the other opponents of, or the opposition for this hearing. So thank you.
Riley. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Good morning. I heard most of your testimony when I got here, and I appreciate the commitment that Peoples has to the city of Chicago through your involvement in community programs and charitable work, and certainly your commitment to veteran hiring, and also your great relationship with our friends in the building trades. But I do believe I'm compelled to ask a couple of questions on behalf of ratepayers in the city of Chicago. And I do have some familiarity with the work that you do based on some work I did with utilities when I worked in the Illinois House of Representatives some time ago. I've been reading with interest in Crane's Chicago Business and the Chicago Tribune, and to some degree the Sun-Times, the controversy over how your rates are set and what inputs are considered or are allowed to be considered or can't be considered. And there was some discussion about the transparent process at the Illinois Commerce Commission, and I do not mean to impugn them in any way, but they've taken the position that the state law doesn't allow it to compel you to cut back on capital spending. And it's been reported that obviously when you have to make major capital expenditures for your network, that ultimately falls on the ratepayer to defray that cost. So I think there's a concern out there being communicated by consumer advocates and other state agencies that these higher rates to pay for the infrastructure improvements, and I'm sure in many cases which are warranted and necessary, have a regressive impact on those who have lower incomes. And I know that we do have some programs out there, but certainly when you compare NICOR costs to costs that Chicago ratepayers are currently paying or are facing in the future, there is a rather significant disparity. So could you please address that to the best of your ability, sir?
More than happy to do that, and we certainly understand and empathize with the challenges that some of our customers have with their bills, and why I mentioned some of the programs we have. To the underlying cost, kind of a couple perspectives. I started out my career working at NICOR, and then I went on to work at other utilities, both urban, suburban, and rural customer base. Without a doubt, there's differences. Even within the family of utilities, there's 7 utilities that are part of our holding company. And you can see dramatic differences, same management, same, procurement strategies, et cetera. You can see substantial differences, and our contractors will tell me the same thing. When I can go into a suburban or rural area where I'm under the grass, very little existing utilities, unlike Chicago where there's 27 different entities that have infrastructure under the ground. In those suburban and rural areas, you can, what we would call, drill in gas line. You go underground, you don't open excavate because there's very little to run into or hit. You can install gas main at dramatically lower costs. You have just the cost of getting vehicles around the city of Chicago. If we hold a meeting happens to take place where you have 15 people, you often have to pay for parking just to hold that meeting in certain locations because there's not free space. So there's numerous areas in which the cost to operate in an urban setting, and we're not unique. If you went to New York or any of those others, you'd see that same difference. What you do notice if you look at Detroit Edison is they have within the same utility both that urban setting, but then a lot of rural and suburban setting. So the rates all blend, they all pay the same rate, so it doesn't jump out as much as, but if you were to segregate just like our own utilities by the urban and suburban areas, and we're just the, People's Gas is just the footprint of Chicago, it really highlights those differences to operate. So paving is a good example. We pave between paving and hard surface, last year the equivalent of the surface area is 70 football fields worth of restoration and recovery with a lot of concrete and asphalt. So those different items, they're the reality of the city and all of its great attributes, but it's an expensive place to do business.
Understood. I'm not sure I'd be comparing the city of Chicago to the city of Detroit by any measure, but I think an apples-to-apples comparison, metro to metro, I think historically the city of Chicago has seen the highest per mile cost in the country. And my understanding was that under previous management, that was considered to be a bit of a national embarrassment. And there are folks who dispute whether those costs are appropriate. And to my colleagues, our constituents are paying the highest per mile costs in the country for their gas service. Whether they're making $40,000 a year or $1 million a year, we're number one in America on per mile costs. And my concern, frankly, is that under new management, those costs haven't gone down, they've increased and are scheduled to increase more. And so, again, I'm not looking to give the company a black eye. You do lots of good things, but I think it is fair to question the rate structure and the inputs that go into that rate structure that impact our voting constituents who are your consumers. And my hope is we'll get testimony from others here today, Chairman, to shed some more light on that. That's my only criticism of this company, frankly, is the way they handle the proceedings at the Illinois Commerce Commission. That's the body that regulates this company. But I would argue the ICC has not always served the best interests of ratepayers in the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago. So I look forward to future testimony. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Riley, and I think we'll get into the meat of it, but I think it speaks volumes as to why we're here. If I was to hire a contractor to fix at home some pipes, he would give me an estimate. There's variance, maybe some the variance say this is how much it's going to cost. We get a contract and we go to work. And anybody here would fight tooth and nail if they would know that the contract all of a sudden comes back and says, the contractor says, guess what? It's going to cost 10 times more than what I gave you. No one would accept that, and definitely would say, well, why would you give me an estimate now at this price, and then coming back later telling me there's going to be 10 times more than what you quoted me? That's crazy. So no one's going to accept that premise, and I think that's what we need to hear and understand. What happened? Who did the estimate? And why was it so far off as to cause these huge cost overruns? So that's where we're here. Anybody else before I bring another witness for Mr. Hasselbeck?